Sorry, boy, but his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Batcave. It is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and I wanted to make this video in response to a friend of mine's question about Charles Cooper. He was one of the leading theologians in the pre-wrath position. The pre-wrath rapture is there's a lot of confusion because of the name of the term, because really every position is kind of a pre-wrath position, including post-trib. Every position is a pre-wrath position because pretty much everybody believes that the saints are going to be taken out of the way in some form before the wrath happens. So technically a pre-trib position, mid-trib position, pre-wrath position are all pre-wrath. Post-trib, you could argue that, well, they're not arguing a rapture before the bowls of wrath are coming out, because a post-trib position actually holds that the resurrected saints in Revelation 20 at the beginning of the millennium are the only time that the saints are resurrected. That's a post-trib position. The only prominent teacher on YouTube, at least I know, that holds that position is Joe Schimmel, which I think he's a good guy in terms of discernment, but that position he's wrong on. The pre-trib, we're not going to get into that, because all the arguments against the pre-trib position I would agree with the pre-wrath position on. So what we're really going to focus on is the major differences between the mid-trib and the pre-wrath position. So if you think of it chronologically, the mid-trib position happens exactly at the middle of Daniel's 70th week, on the day of the abomination of desolation, at the 7th trump. That is the mid-trib position. And just so you know, that position is not unique to me. If you study older literature from the 1800s and 1900s on the futurist positions, you'll find that the mid-trib position was always being argued by people, because it is the most common sense position if you just read the scriptures for yourself. However, the pre-trib position has this complex theology that comes with this theology of dispensations, this mythology about, the church being a mystery until Paul revealed it, which is not true. It was a mystery until Christ revealed it. And then Paul definitely did more writing on it, but the apostles were definitely teaching, ministering to the Gentiles. The Gentiles were coming in before Paul was converted. You had the Ethiopian eunuch, you had the Samaritans, which were kind of half Gentile, then you had Cornelius, which was after Paul's conversion, but Paul was considered the chief apostle to the Gentiles, just like Peter was the chief apostle to the Jews, but it didn't start with Paul, and that's important to know. So anyways, I would agree with the pre-wrath position on all their criticisms of the pre-trib position. I think they're all accurate. And then this is where I'm going to disagree with them. And it really comes down to one single verse that I'm going to disagree with them on. And then that verse is going to roll into how they dictate all of their theology. They can give you the rationales and only focus on this one thing, because this is the only reason the pre-wrath position hangs where it does, okay? In Revelation chapter 6, and their entire position is based on this, okay? Revelation chapter 6, when you have the you have the 7th trump, or I'm sorry, you have the sun turning to darkness and the moon turning to blood, and the stars falling from heaven. And then you have, it says, heaven departed as a scroll when it was rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved from their places. Now, this seems like, on the surface, if you didn't read anything after this, this is the end of the world. When you see the heaven departed like a scroll. Okay, so let's look at that in the Greek. Let's see what that means. So, and heaven. Okay, now this word Uranos for heaven can mean the heavens. It can mean heaven, like literal, like this is a word that has a lot of meaning to it. It can mean the sky, it can mean outer space, or it can mean where God dwells, heaven. Okay, so this just says the heaven, apochorizo, to rend apart, reflexively, to separate, to depart asunder, as a scroll when it was rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved from their places. Now, I'm going to argue that this is not the heavens dissolving at the end of the millennium. I think they would agree with me there. But I think what is happening here, this is my personal opinion, what can cause the sun to turn to darkness, the moon to turn to black, and the heavens to red? I think that's the New Jerusalem appearing. I think the New Jerusalem comes out of, if you will, a trans-dimensional space into this world. So it comes from, the third heaven, if you will, to here. And I think we could best describe the third heaven as another dimension. It's behind or around this dimension, if you will. And it comes into this dimension. And the gravity from it, because remember, this thing is the size of a moon. It is literally, it is a cube that is almost exactly the size to fit behind the moon. Okay, so it could hide behind the moon. So it is big enough to cast a red shadow on the moon. It is big enough to block out the sun, depending on how close it is, because the sun and the moon are the same size. So all it has to do is it's literally like 100,000 miles closer than the moon or something like that, or like, 10,000 miles closer than the moon, and it would block the sun. It would cast a red shadow on the moon because its outer walls, a sardine stone, and the gravity, because this thing is basically gold and stone. It's massively dense. So the gravity of this thing would shake the whole earth. This is my opinion. This is what I think is being described here once you understand the dimensionality of the New Jerusalem. And then it says the kings of the earth and the great men and the magistrates and the rich men and the chief captains and the mighty men and every bondman and every free man hid themselves in the dens of the rocks and from the mountains. Now, it doesn't say that they're seeing the New Jerusalem. The only thing that's saying is that the heaven has departed like a scroll. Every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And again, if you have a massive earthquake, and this is going to be in Isaiah. And this is, see here, there's a couple things in Isaiah. So it was Isaiah 34, it says, "In that the heavens shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled together like a scroll, and their hosts shall fall down as a leaf falleth off their vine, as the falling of a fig tree." Now that's very specific, right? And that's because I believe that this is a dual fulfillment prophecy. You're going to have a foretype of it when the New Jerusalem appears, and then the ultimate is the end of the millennium, where the heavens are dissolved, everything melts with a fervent heat. Okay, but if you go to Isaiah 24, you're going to have this. "The Lord maketh empty and maketh waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be as with the people, as with the priest, as with the servant, as with the master, as with the maid, as with their mistress, as with the buyer, as with the seller, as with the lender, as with the borrower, as with the taker of usury, as with the giver of the usury to them." So in other words, nobody is spared from this. "The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled, for the Lord has spoken his word. The earth mourneth and fadeth away, the world languisheth and fadeth away, the haughty people of the earth do languish. The earth also is defiled unto the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws and changed the ordinance and broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore hath a curse devoured the earth, and they shall dwell therein and are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left. The new wine mourneth, the vine languisheth, the merry-hearted do sigh. The mirth of the tabret ceaseth, the noise of those who rejoice endeth, and the joy of the harp ceaseth." I believe all this is talking about the nuclear war, the nuclear desolation that's happening during the six seals. Because it's going to say this: "From the uttermost parts of the earth we have heard songs, even glory to the righteous. But I said, my leanness, woe unto me, the treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously, yea, the treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously." This is Jesus talking. The reason he's saying my leanness is because his body is not nearly as big as it looks. So we see, from the uttermost parts of the earth we have heard the songs, glory to the righteous. Why? And here's why. Because in World War III, we're going to be thinking we're doing God's work, just like Russia is saying right now. Okay, Russia and America are going to be nuking each other, and this is going to go global. And we're all claiming to be doing God's work, okay? They did that in World War I too. So don't be surprised at that, okay? But I said, so this is the Lord speaking, my leanness to me. Why? Because the body of Christ is not nearly as big as it looks. There's a lot of false Christians in it. And it says, the treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously, yea, the treacherous dealers have dealt treacherously. The treacherous dealers are the false teachers who are getting people to think they're saved when they're not, okay? Fear and the pit and the snare are upon thee, O inhabitant of the earth. Now this is the pit. Okay, this is going to be in Isaiah 2, where it talks about these people going and casting all their idols to the bats and the moles, and going down with the bats and the moles so they can still worship their idols. Okay, and it says, it shall come to pass that he who fleeth from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit. Now this is important. Remember, if the New Jerusalem is appearing, the earth is shaking, all this stuff is going, these people are fleeing from fear that it's the day of the Lord, but doesn't necessarily mean it's the day of the Lord. It says, so them that flee from the noise of the fear shall fall into the pit, and he that cometh up out of the midst of the pit shall be taken in the snare. So who goes down into the pit? Those are the rich rulers of the earth. Those are your Illuminati, if you will. Who comes out of the pit? That's the Antichrist. So it says, he that cometh out of the midst of the pit shall be taken in the snare. Well, that is the Antichrist. For the windows of from on high are open, and the foundations of the earth do shake. The earth is utterly broken down. The earth is clean dissolved. The earth is moved exceedingly. Now you see that these terms like dissolved, like it says parar, it says broken up, violate, frustrated, cast off, cause to cease, defeat, disannul, disappoint, dissolve, divide, make of none effect, fail, frustrate, come to naught. So you see a lot of these words are basically talking, when it's talking about dissolving, it's more like shaken down to rubble, if you will. Okay, it's not talking about like the elements melting with a fervent heat like Peter's talking, okay? And then it says, the earth shall reel to and forth like a drunkard, and shall be removed like a cottage, and the transgression thereof shall be heavy upon it, and it shall fall and not rise again. So this is the actual earth shaking. So remember, every island and everything is moved out of its place. Well, what's happening? The earth is shaking. Well, the New Jerusalem has the gravity to cause this massive earthquake. Remember, the moon, so far away as it is, causes the tides to go back and forth on the earth. So if the New Jerusalem shows up, and it's a lot closer and it's a lot denser than the moon, it could cause the whole earth to shake, and it could cause all the plates to move, all the islands to move out of their place. I mean, it could just be really awful. And it says, and it shall come to pass on that day that the Lord shall punish the hosts of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. Remember, every bond, every free man, the kings hid in the caves, okay? And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in a pit, and shall be shut up in prison, and after many days they shall be visited. Now, this is foreshadowed in Joshua, because when Joshua has all these kings come out against him, I think it's the Battle of Ai, they all come out against him. They catch all the kings, and they put them in a cave, and they roll a boulder over them, and they finish subduing all the armies around them. And then they go back and execute those kings. So where these people think they're going and hiding from the wrath of the Lamb, God's version of what they're doing, remember what Satan thinks he's pulling off his own schemes, but God's sovereign over it. They think they're hiding from the wrath of the Lamb, and he's saying, no, they're gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit and shut up in prison, and after many days they will be visited. Well, why? Because they're going to be there for the millennium. This is the millennium underground, okay? And I'm going to try to write this book series, I hope, God willing. But these are the people who stay underground, and these are going to be the people and the armies that corrupt the earth, that convince everybody to go against Jesus in the last days. They're going to come back. Okay, but it says after many days they're going to be visited. Why? Because it says the one that comes out of the bottomless pit is, remember, it's going to be the Antichrist in the book of Revelation, but then it's going to be Satan, because he's thrown into the bottomless pit at the beginning of the millennium. So at the end of the millennium, he's going to be the one that comes out. So all of this stuff has a dual fulfillment to it. It's fulfilled in Antichrist and then in Lucifer himself. Remember, the Antichrist is like, okay, the revelation of Antichrist is juxtaposed to the revelation of Christ, okay? At the end of the millennium, when the earth is dissolved and everything's melted with a fervent heat, that's the revelation of the Father. Okay, so the revelation of Christ is the rapture. The revelation of Father is where everything is dissolved. Okay, likewise, the revelation of Antichrist juxtaposes the revelation of Christ. And Satan being released at the end, the revelation of Lucifer as a direct enemy of God is going to be juxtaposed with the Father burning him down. Does that make sense? So you have these complete parallels with them. So then here it says, and the moon shall be confounded. This is one of the few places I like the NIV. It says the moon will be abashed. Okay, abashed means blushing. Okay, and the sun will be ashamed. So if you're ashamed, you hide. The sun hides. The moon is blushing. The moon turns to blood. When the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and Jerusalem before his ancients gloriously. Okay, now remember, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem before his ancients gloriously, remember this. There's a Zion on earth and there's a Zion in heaven. Okay, so he's there in the New Jerusalem on the throne. Remember, in the 6 seals, he's opening the seals. He's been given the scroll. Okay, and he's in the throne. He's opening it. So all of this is describing the 6 seals, but this is going to have a dual fulfillment, like a lot of these prophecies are, just like the Gog-Magog. The Gog-Magog is going to be fulfilled here, followed by a 7-year period. and then it's going to be fulfilled at the end of the millennium as well. So all this stuff is dual because, again, one is for the Antichrist and one is for Lucifer himself. One is for Christ and one is for the Father. Okay, when the Father is revealed, the whole creation is going to dissolve in fervent heat because God is a consuming fire. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. That's my interpretation. Now here is the pre-wrath interpretation. So the pre-wrath is going to go to Revelation 6. And again, I think Isaiah 24 is more Revelation 6, and I think Isaiah 34 is more end of the millennium. And I think there's parallels between the two because they're very similar. I also think there's parallels between the Gog-Magog invasion and Armageddon because they're very similar. Because one is meant to deceive the wicked into thinking Armageddon has come, the wrath of God has come. So when the Antichrist comes, all the wicked are going to be deceived into thinking he's Christ. Because remember, it says God is sending upon them a great delusion so that they'll be deceived, okay? God is literally allowing all this stuff to happen that looks so similar to Armageddon so that the wicked will think it's Christ come when it's Antichrist. So, when he opens the sixth seal, these people are saying, hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne. Remember, Christ is in heavenly Jerusalem in Mount Zion. He's not on earth right now. And from the wrath of the Lamb. So how are they saying, hide us from him who's sitting on the throne, if Jesus is not here physically present on earth, and from the wrath of the Lamb? Why do they think that? And I think that's because the New Jerusalem has appeared. I think the New Jerusalem appears, and this is just my speculation. I think it appears, but then I think it goes and hides behind the moon. And I think it comes back out and hovers over Antichrist's kingdom, and that's how his kingdom turns to complete darkness. And that's why you'll read this in Zechariah 14. It will say it will be daylight in the evening because it's blocking the sun, but you'll see it come out in the evening when it passes over the New Jerusalem. That's my opinion. Okay, so this is just me trying to visualize and visually speculate on what this would look like when these prophecies are fulfilled. I could be wrong, but where I say the wrath begins is going to be Revelation 11. Because if you see this, it's going to say, this is when the two witnesses are resurrected and raptured. It says, I heard a great voice from heaven saying, come up hither, and they ascended to heaven in the cloud, and their enemies beheld them. Okay. In that same hour there was a great earthquake, and a tenth part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted and gave glory to God of heaven. Okay. This is going to be the ones who are going to flee Jerusalem. Those are the ones that give glory to God in heaven. Okay. And in the next chapter, we're going to see them symbolically fleeing Jerusalem. Okay. So this is the second woe is past, and that's the sixth trumpet. The third woe cometh quickly. And the seventh angel sounded, so that's the seventh trumpet. And there were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. And the 24 elders which sat before God on their seats fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, we give thanks, O Lord God Almighty, which art and was and art to come, because thou hast taken thee thy great power and hast reigned. And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come. In the time of the dead, that they should be judged, that they should give us reward unto thy servants the prophets, and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, both small and great, and should destroy them which destroy the earth. Okay, so what they are saying right here is exactly Daniel 12. Okay, because it's going to say, at that time Michael shall arise, and the dead will be judged. Okay, so this is Revelation 12, Daniel 12, 1 through 3. Okay, well, in the next chapter, chapter 12 here, you're going to see Michael going to cast Satan out of heaven. You're going to see the Jews fleeing into the wilderness, and you're going to see the child of the woman being caught up, which is the body of Christ being caught up. Okay, so they're all symbolically basically showing you Satan being cast out of heaven, Michael arising, the Great Tribulation starting, the Jews fleeing Jerusalem, and the church being raptured, all symbolically in chapter 12. And then it's going to be more clear in chapter 14, because in chapter 13 they're going to describe the abomination of desolation being set up, and then in chapter 14 they're going to describe the saints being in the 144,000 being in heaven, and the harvest of the earth. Okay, so that's when basically the rapture happens. So the rapture is pre-wrath, because at the seventh trumpet the rapture has. So remember, this is describing the two witnesses, and it's describing their ministry in the first 3.5 years. Okay, there are no timestamps on the seals, and this is where the pre-wrath camp is going to take their theology from the pre-trib camp. They put the seals in Daniel's 70th week, and there's nothing whatsoever that puts the seals in Daniel's 70th week. Not in Revelation and not in any of the other prophecies that point to it. Where it puts them, if you know what prophecies point to it, you to correspond with the war in the 6 seals, you want to go to Joel 2, and you want to go to Ezekiel 38 and 39. So in Joel 2, I was just talking about this with another guy. What you're going to have here, we covered this in the Revelation Bible study that I did with Mike and Brandon and Randy and Rhea. In Joel 2, it's going to say that this northern army is coming on Israel, but he says, but I will remove from you the northern army, and I will drive them into land barren and desolate, with his face towards the east. See? And then it says, he'll come down to you the former rain and the latter rain in the first month. And he describes that, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, and your sons and daughters will prophesy. And of course, this has a dual fulfillment because it's the former rain and the latter rain. The former rain is Pentecost, the latter rain is the sealing of the 144,000. Okay, well, when does the sealing of the 144,000 happen? It happens at the 7th seal. It happens actually at the 6th seal is all the sun turning darkness and the moon turning to blood, the earth shaking, and it's the 144,000 being sealed, and it's the bride coming to completion. Okay, and then the 7th seal is opened, and then and then the trumpets happen. So watch what happens. In the trumpets, you have this. He pours out his spirit, and then he says he shows wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. There are no blood, fire, or pillars of smoke in Revelation 6. This is not in the seals. This is in the trumpets. You have the first 2 of them are stuff turning to blood. You have fire. You have basically wormwood coming down and poisoning the rivers, which is a flaming meteor. You have another flaming meteor that burns up the grass and the trees, or a third of it. And then pillars of smoke is the smoke ascending from the bottomless pit for the it's basically the beast rising. Okay. And so then it says, and the sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon turned to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. So these are out of sequential order. Okay. So what's happening is it looks like, see how this is like, and it shall come to pass, and the servants, and I will show wonders in heaven. Okay. These are all connected. But then he finalizes it with the sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord. And your pre-wrath camp is going to put that together and say that's immediately before. But the answer is no, it's not before. Just like Jesus is going to say there's going to be signs in the heavens, and the sun and the moon will turn dark. You got to remember, the sun and the moon are also darkened by a third in one of the trumpets. Okay, the signs in the heaven continue into the trumpets. So the signs of the heaven are the 6th and 7th seal, which contains the 7 trumpets. Okay, so you got to take that all into account. Christ is not giving a detailed chronology in Matthew 24, nor is this meant to be a detailed chronology in Joel 2, because this isn't the subject of this is not laying out the entire book of Revelation. The subject of here is the deliverance of Israel from this great northern army when they repent, and then the Spirit being poured out on them. Now that is the exact same subject of Ezekiel 38, okay? So he's going to talk about this great northern army that's coming in Ezekiel 38, and then in Ezekiel 39, he's going to say the exact same thing. Watch this. Now he's not going to mention the sun turning to darkness and the moon turning to blood, but he is going to mention the whole earth shaking. He's going to say, then shall they know that I am the Lord their God, which caused them to be led in captivity among the heathen. I have gathered them into their own land, and have left none of them there any more. Neither will I hide my face from them anymore, for I have poured out my spirit in the house of Israel. So when does God pour out his spirit in the house of Israel? And the answer is the former rain is Pentecost, the latter rain is the sealing of the 144,000. And don't be surprised if this is like an anniversary of Pentecost where this happens. Don't be surprised about that. But then if you go back to chapter 38, he's going to say, and I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood. I will rain upon him and upon his bands and upon many people that are with him, and overflowing rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself. I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains. A man's sword will be against his brother. How do I know this is not Armageddon? Because God doesn't do this in Armageddon. In Armageddon, he just speaks a word and the enemies are dissolved. It says their eyes melt in their sockets. Okay, so this is not Armageddon. Those who think Gog, Magog is Armageddon are wrong. In Armageddon, he just speaks a word and they're dead. Okay. But he says, so the fishes in the sea and the fowls of the heaven, the beasts of the earth, and the creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all men that are on the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. Okay, so there's your great worldwide earthquake. And then he says, I will call for a sword against him throughout my mountain, saith the Lord, and every man's sword will be against his brother. That is the Gog Magog, or that's the Joel 2 army being defeated. And then it says, I will plead against him with pestilence and blood. I will rain upon him and upon his bands, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. I suppose you could make an argument that that's blood, fires, and pillars of smoke. I guess. And then he says, thus I will magnify myself and sanctify myself, and will be known in the eyes of many nations. So maybe you could make that argument that that's blood, fires, and pillars of smoke. But we see all this happening, and then afterwards we have a 7-year period where they're burning the weapons. Why? Because this is what leads up to Daniel's 70th week. And most of your pre-wrath scholars, okay, now, Chris, here's who I consider the leading scholars of the pre-wrath camp. The guy who came up with it was Marv Rosenthal, I think in the 90s. Charles Cooper would be considered the senior theologian behind that camp, but Marv Rosenthal came up with it. He argued against Dave Hunt in the 90s, so look that up. Marv Rosenthal, Dave Hunt debate on the rapture, okay? Then you got Charles Cooper, who's a leading theologian and writer on the subject. And then you have Chris White, who's definitely a contributing scholar on the subject. I think he's pretty solid overall, but I disagree with him on this. You have Alan Kirschner, who is a PhD on the subject, who I've actually met him. I think he does a very good job of debunking the pre-trib theory, but I asked him very basic questions about the Gog-Magog invasion and Luke 17 and the 2 witnesses and stuff, and he could not intelligently answer these. And he admitted he had not thought a lot of this stuff through. Okay, I think he's a good guy. I just think these guys, again, some of them are making their living on this theory. Another one is Ryan Habana, who kind of rolls with. I think he's probably less of a scholar on the subject, but I think he's a pastor that's helped promote Alan Kirschner. So your main scholars are going to be Charles Cooper, Chris White, and Alan Kirschner. Okay, now ask them about this 7-year period. What do you think this 7-year period represents? If you meet any of them, if you're on their channels, if you're on pre-wrath discussion boards, what do you do with this 7-year period? There is only one 7-year period mentioned in the Bible, and that's Daniel's 70th week, okay? Now, what these guys don't realize is that Ezekiel and Daniel are writing at the same time, okay? He writes about this mysterious 7-year period, and Daniel details that 7-year period in groves. Not only that, Ezekiel mentions Daniel by name twice in his book. He talks about how this place is so wicked that even if he's talking about Jerusalem, even if Job and I forget who the third one was, but it was Job and Daniel and somebody else were in it, God would still not spare the city. That's how wicked it was. Okay, so Daniel was considered one of the most righteous people, in the land at that time. Okay, so Daniel was a known prophet at the time that Jerusalem was destroyed, because he was pulled out of Jerusalem when Nebuchadnezzar came and took a bunch of the youth and the craftsmen and stuff like that, and the administrators and the princes. Okay, then afterwards, Jerusalem is destroyed, and Ezekiel's prophesying on that destruction. Okay, so Ezekiel knows of Daniel's prophecies. That's very important. Daniel's already prophesying at that time, and Daniel's prophecy of well, let's see. Let's look at Daniel. He's known. So I guess Daniel's prophecy of the 70th week is not written yet, because that's not until the reign of the reign of Darius. But remember, most of Daniel's life is during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, Daniel's probably a youth, and Nebuchadnezzar's probably a middle-aged man when he takes these youth captive, and then he has Jerusalem sacked, and then he dies, and then his son is ruling, and Daniel's there. And most of Daniel's prophecies happen in the space of about 3 years, because you go from, it's Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, Belshazzar. He gets overthrown and killed, and then Darius the Mede takes over for him, and then after Darius takes over the city of Babylon, he I think he abdicates rulership because he's an old man by this time, and then that's going to be Cyrus is going to be in charge after that, and so it's literally like a 3-year period. Okay, so most of Daniel's prophecies are in that 3-year period, and the exception is going to be, remember, it's Nebuchadnezzar who's given the dream that Daniel interprets years earlier. Okay, so the point is that what your pre-wrath people need to consider is that Daniel and Ezekiel were meant to correspond with each other because they're both speaking about the time of the Jews' captivity. Remember, these guys are both writing around the time Jerusalem is destroyed and the Jews are dispersed. And so the subject matter of their prophecies are all about the Jews being exiled and then returned to the nations. And what Ezekiel is going to focus on is Israel being regathered into the land, and the Gog-Magog invasion, where God basically establishes them in this land as him defending them worldwide. And then this is important. Ezekiel 39, it says he has left none of his people to where he scattered them. So I'm a quarter Jewish. I'm a male with a Jewish last name. I'm in America. So we know this has not been fulfilled yet. We also know that's not going to be at the end of the millennium, because he's not going to wait till the end of the millennium to gather the Jews into their land. We also know it's not going to be Armageddon, because the Jews are going to be gathered into their land well before that. Remember, the Jews are going to be prominent in Daniel's 70th week. That's what's going to lead them to the rebellion and needing to be humbled. And that's why they're going to worship the Antichrist. So you have this 7-year period. And it talks about the Jews being gathered into land and then God defending them, and then this 7-year period after that. Well, Daniel's going to talk all about that 7-year period, because Daniel doesn't mention Gog-Magog at all. Just like Ezekiel barely mentions the 70th week, Daniel doesn't mention the Gog-Magog invasion. Daniel has all these detailed plans that start in ancient history, and then they just all of a sudden roll into the Antichrist day, which is all of it just kind of just leaps forward from either from Greece or from Rome into Daniel's 70th week. So you need to take Daniel and Ezekiel and merge them together to get the whole picture. Again, remember, dispensationalism is a lie. Okay, it was never meant to be. And so this idea of there being a church age with this line where the church age stops and then the Jewish age starts, that's a lie from dispensationalism. Throw that out. Okay, what you really have is you have a gradual Israel becoming a nation in a day. That's in Isaiah. And then you have them being regathered into the land. And then you have all of them being regathered into land after this victory happens. Okay? So that's going to lead you into Daniel's 70th week. Well, likewise, the 6 seals are progressive. Remember, the idea that the 6 seals have to be in Daniel's 70th week is tied to dispensationalism. And that's what the pre-wrath people don't get, okay? They're debunking the pre-trib theory when they should be debunking dispensationalism altogether. Because dispensationalism creates these lines where there don't need to be lines. And to the dispensationalists, there's a line in the church age and then the tribulation. That's false, okay? The church age is in Daniel's 70th week, because the rapture happens mid-trib. And since the pre-wrathers agree that it's not pre-trib, they don't need the church age to end there, so they don't need the 6 seals in Daniel's 70th week. They need to correct that, okay? So what you have then is the 6 seals being progressive. And I could argue that the 6 seals started in the 1800s. I mean, you could argue that, man, that's when the New Age started in a big way, is the 1800s, Luciferianism, the occult, the One World Order started in the League of Nations. You could argue that. You could argue that there's deception followed by war, followed by economic collapses, followed by plagues in World War I. I mean, you could go all the way back there and say it's like that, Yeah, and it seems to keep cycling forward because these are birth pangs, okay? And we could say, well, we're in another cycle here. And these cycles, yes, they could keep going. They could keep going. But we're talking global government, we're talking digital currency, and we're talking about complete control and drones and UFOs and stuff like that. And that's new-ish. But when did UFOs start? In the 1800s with H.G. Wells. Okay, so you could argue that all this stuff started in the 1800s. Guess what else started in the late 1800s? The Zionist Movement. Under Herzl and those guys, okay? Read about the Zionist Movement. So you have the New Age and the Zionist Movement. You have the charismatic, the holiness Pentecostals and Montanism coming back. You have You have all these different false cults like Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism, New Age, Think and Grow Rich, power of positivity or positive confession theology coming in from the New Age into the church around that time. You could argue that that was when the White Horse was released. And then you see the Zionism, and then you see what do you have? You have war nonstop. First you have, the Crimean War, then you have the World War I, then you have World War II, then you have the Cold War, then you have the War on Terror, and now we're looking at World War III. We've had nonstop wars on a global scale. It's not always everybody nuking each other, but it's nonstop war ever since, really the 1800s. We've never had like world peace everywhere, but we have had war involving major superpowers almost nonstop, either through proxies or directly, since the 1800s. And you could argue, well, these things have gone on since Christ. You could go all the way back then and say these things have always gone on between these superpowers. Maybe that's true. But the point is there's nothing placing them in the seals, or there's nothing placing the seals in the 70th week. But what we have here is that the sixth seal with the earth shaking and all this stuff aligns with, and the Jews being regathered in the land and the Spirit being poured out, which is the 144,000 in the sixth seal. Then we have the seventh seal inaugurating. When the seventh seal is open, that's when Daniel's 70th week starts. And you have the 7 trumpets, and they end with the end of the 3.5-year ministry of the 2 witnesses, that's where I agree with the pre-tribbers. Okay, so what I would say is there needs to be somebody who looks at both the pre-trib and the pre-wrath theories and merges them together. And what you will come up with, and this is what I came up with, was the mid-trib. I think the mid-trib is the oldest position. I think you can make a very clear argument that that's what was taught by Papias and Hippolytus and Irenaeus and the apostles. I think you could argue that, well, Paul says it won't happen until the abomination of desolation. That's clear. That's mid-trib. Jesus says it happens on the night the Jews are fleeing Jerusalem. That's mid-trib. Matthew 24 also, he says it's after the tribulation leading up to the abomination of desolation. That's when it happens. That's mid-trib. Paul is going to say the resurrection happens at the last trump in 1 Corinthians 15. That's mid-trib. And then, of course, Revelation places it right in between the Jews fleeing for 3.5 years and the 2 witnesses preaching for 3.5 years. So there's 3.5 years before, 3.5 years after. You also have 3.5 years after that the Antichrist rules through the image of the beast. It's mid-trib. Everything points to mid-trib. So if you guys are on the pre-wrath channels, please challenge them. I would happily debate these guys. Debating is a rhetorical contest. It's not that productive, but what it does is it points out holes in other people's arguments. Okay, you win a debate with smart questions. You don't win a debate with fancy arguments. You win a debate with smart questions that they can't answer. Okay, I've personally sat and listened to again some of these guys. I met Alan Kirschner and Ryan Habana in person. Went to one of their conferences, and I waited for all their fans to be done with their fan questions. And I asked exactly 4 questions. I just listened to what they were saying. I didn't ask any redundant questions. And I asked 4 questions, and they couldn't answer them. They had no answers for them. And when I tried to posit my theory in their place, they're like, wait, let's take this offline. Let's talk about this later. And then I never heard from them again because they ran and hid. They keep going to their conference to promote their position, but when somebody challenges their position with smart questions, they run and hide. Okay, and that's what the pre-trib camp does, the pre-wrath camp does. A debate, look, you don't have to be a great debater to win a debate. You just have to know your stuff. Okay, and I know all my arguments for mid-trib, but what they don't know is what they don't know. Where's the 7-year period? Where is the Spirit being poured out in Israel in the book of Revelation? And they're going to agree, well, that's the 144,000. Okay, well, that's followed by a 7-year period in Ezekiel 39, right? Okay. Do you see the 7-year period here? Or how about this? Why do you think the 6 seals have to, or the 7 seals have to be in Daniel's 70th week? What is your reason for that? Why do you believe they have to be there? And they don't have a reason because they just adopted that from the pre-trib. They adopted it from dispensationalism. And then, of course, why do you think that the wrath has come there? And the answer is because the wicked think the wrath has come. The thing that we have to remember is when you look at dual fulfillment, when you look at the fact that God is sending a great delusion, there are going to be things that seem like they're one thing, but they're actually another. And that takes a lot to discern. But what you start with is the plainest statements. And the plainest statements are, at the last trump. That's very obvious. At the last trump. I'm sorry, but you're not going to have a series of trumps after a statement that says at the last trump. That's the ridiculousness of it. You're not going to have 7 trumps after somebody says at the last trump. God is not trying to confuse you by saying at the last trump and then there's 7 trumpets after that. Just disregard those. The last trump is before the 7 trumpets. And it's not mentioned in the book of Revelations, but trust me, it's there. And that's what the pre-tribbers do, and that's what the pre-wrath people do. There's no trumpet. There's no trumpet in Revelation 6. So why do they say that's where the rapture happens? The answer is because their theology is still hinged to dispensationalism. They don't realize that it is. They haven't done that homework yet. But it's a pretty young camp. You got to remember, the dispensationalists have been preaching their stuff since the 1800s. The pre-wrath camp has been preaching their stuff really since the 2000s. Chris White, I just found him in 2000. He started putting his stuff out there in like 2011, 2012. Okay, so you're talking about, this is a 10-year-old camp. Okay, there's a lot of stuff that they haven't studied out yet. And they're too busy putting out their books and promoting and getting their PhDs and putting out their videos. Chris White he was a missionary evangelist for a while. Alan Kirschner is working on his PhD. Charles Cooper's the only one who's really been speaking to it. But this is a camp that's young and it hasn't had a lot of deep theology. There's no pre-wrath Bible college. Like there's 2 schools that teach pre-trib, which are the Dallas Theological Seminary and then Liberty University both teach it. Okay. And now Moody teaches the pre-trib rapture too. So you have 3 Bible colleges, very prominent Bible colleges teaching pre-trib. You have no Bible colleges teaching pre-wrath, which means you don't have anybody really researching and studying it that deeply. So give them grace because it's a young camp, but I have been studying this for 20-some years. I'm willing to stand on it, and I think there's a lot of lay Christians that would stand behind me on this. So I would ask you guys, look, I'm not looking to be famous. I'm looking to just stand my ground. And I would ask you to challenge Joel Richardson, who's pre-wrath, challenge Chris White, challenge Alan Kirschner, and say, you guys, why won't you talk to Aaron Fochman? Why won't you debate Aaron Fochman? I realize he's not famous, but he's claiming that you guys can't answer his questions. You have no answers for his questions. They're out there trying to spin their own stuff. I'm just trying to explain what I believe the Bible is saying clearly. And when I'm speculating, I try to make it very clear. I'm just speculating. This could be wrong, but what the Bible says clearly is it happens at the mid-trib. That's crystal clear. So hope you guys are blessed by this and hope you have a great rest of the day. And I'm out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.